Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla as it's known in Japan, from 1984. This is continuing my week-long series leading up to the new Godzilla film of follow-ups to the original Godzilla film, since every time they rebooted it, they would simply just actually reboot the sequel. They wouldn't reboot the original film. And this is actually the very first reboot of Godzilla ever made, so it kind of relates more to the film that's coming out to theaters this Friday. Godzilla had been gone from movie screens for 9 years. The last Godzilla film, 1975's Terror of Mechagodzilla, was a pretty big flop. Toho retired the character after that. They considered ways to revive him. I keep hearing about this Godzilla vs. the Devil project that could have happened but didn't. It sounds kind of dumb. Toho did a festival and played all the Godzilla films of the original series and all their monster films, and it was a huge success, and there was a Godzilla resurgence in Japan in the early 80s, so they felt they definitely needed to get to work on a new Godzilla movie, and so that kind of spurred all this on. This film's trying to get back to the darker roots of the original film, using Godzilla more as an antagonist than being a superhero or someone who saves people or even fights another kaiju. He is coming there to destroy Japan yet again, which is an interesting thing to bring back. But I don't know if this film can really succeed in it, but I think it does, and honestly a very good attempt at getting closer to that. After a shipping boat is caught in a storm and is being dragged towards volcanic islands, sees a giant monster come out of it, and then after the one survivor from that boat is rescued, he eventually identifies that monster as Godzilla, and Japan knows they have something bad coming up, the Godzilla that hasn't been around since the 50s, because this film eliminates all the continuity from Godzilla Raids Again to the Terror of Mechagodzilla. This film is a direct sequel to the original film. Japan hasn't been attacked by Godzilla since then, so at first have a media blackout and are going to not tell anyone about it until they can figure out what's going on, but then Godzilla decides to attack a nuclear Russian sub, and this being the Cold War in 1984, spurs an international incident between US and Russia because Russia thinks US took out their submarine. You know, they didn't think it was Godzilla, so Japan has to release that they know Godzilla, most definitely that Godzilla destroyed the sub, and this film really lives in the Cold War politics of the time. In fact, it's actually fairly political, interestingly enough, and they have to deal with Godzilla and what the international community feels should be done with Godzilla, how they should get rid of him before he attacks Japan or possibly somewhere else. I think a lot like a lot of mass destruction kind of disaster movies like an Independence Day acknowledges that possibly Godzilla would attack somewhere other than Japan, and that the international community wants to have something to say about it. The idea that America and Russia, the two global superpowers at the time, would really want to sit down with Japan and have these discussions was actually one of the more interesting parts of the film. It was a smarter way to do a Godzilla movie, to acknowledge what was going on in the Cold War. The Cold War went on for a long time, and there are a lot of Godzilla films made during the Cold War, but this is really the Godzilla Cold War movie, and it tries to combine politics and Godzilla, and I think that works for the most part. But the political subplot with the Prime Minister, I thought that worked very well, actually. It's just this plot where the guy who originally found Godzilla and his sister and this reporter and all this nonsense, and they do have an invention, that this bird call invention that's going to get Godzilla to leave them alone, but really I felt the film spent way too much time on them because they weren't really that interesting. They just felt like the normal human subplot in a monster movie that you get really sick of. You almost fall asleep during, and you're like, can we just get to the monsters already? I don't care about this at all. It's also, they weren't very interesting characters. Had they been interesting characters like in the original Godzilla movie, those characters are interesting and have something to do with what's going on. And these people kind of did. You got Godzilla to leave, but I felt like, you know, he was getting kind of tired. Maybe he would have left anyway. Everything that was going on with the politics, with everything from what was going on with Russia, and Russia being pushy, and the Americans even saving the day at one point, which is unfathomable, seeing this film so close to the original Godzilla movie. Whoa, Japanese-American relations changed quite a bit in the 30 years between the original Godzilla film and this film. It's just really bizarre how quickly that happened. And that they actually acknowledge, like, you know, this could maybe be a problem for someone else. He doesn't just have to attack Japan. But apparently Godzilla doesn't like to travel too far, so he's not going to. But yeah, I like that they at least acknowledge that, and it kind of goes into more of what a creature like Godzilla would mean politically. But because of that odd subplot, if they just kept cutting to someone inventing this bird call thing, that would be fine. Spending as much time, it just didn't really, for me, go anywhere. They were uninteresting characters. It brought down the whole movie. The Godzilla attacks, which I did still like, and they have this animatronic head that they don't use too much. The staging is alright, and there are certainly worse Godzilla attacks. The lighting has this really harsh 80s lighting with 80s kind of glare on it that I really didn't like. It felt like an 80s commercial, like I was watching Spuds MacKenzie. Godzilla, much like in the original, Ishiro Honda figured out, is that you keep Godzilla underlit as dark as possible, and in this he's very well lit, and I kind of didn't like that. It felt a little more TV than it needed to be. But I did think the animatronics worked very well. The elaborate sets looked beautiful. There's one part where you just see Godzilla reflected off of this building with a lot of windows on it, this kind of almost, you know, those buildings that looks like almost a glass building. You see him reflect on that, and I thought that was a really good shot. The sets were very intricate, and you can tell the level of detail, and the budget was a lot higher, and the technology had obviously advanced in those 30 years, but it didn't seem like they knew how to use those special effects the same way they knew how to use them 30 years before with lesser technology. It seemed like they had more technology, but they didn't know how to shoot it as well. It really isn't trying to do a documentary style. It's trying to be a big film production. Maybe focus more on those political meetings, because that I thought was interesting. That was something different from a Godzilla movie, but it still wants to be your average Godzilla movie while being a different Godzilla movie. It succeeds in being a different Godzilla movie, but still wanting to have that subplot with the normal person who first sees Godzilla. I don't always really like that, and I don't think it really helps the film or the narrative. Another subplot that the film has to bear that doesn't really go anywhere necessarily. It doesn't have a rewarding quality to the audience. I guess they're supposed to be the audience surrogate, but it never really works out that way. This film was released in America, and it was actually the last Toho Godzilla film released in America until Godzilla 2000 came out 15 years later. Because this film didn't do very well, and it was re-released as Godzilla in 1985, and they made an American cut of it and put Raymond Burr in there. New World Pictures did it. A lot of people say Roger Corman was involved in that remake, but he wasn't. Roger Corman had left New World Pictures before that film came out, and I assume was in production as well. That version was panned by critics. Most people don't really like it. I think at that time, recutting a foreign film felt a lot more heinous than it did in the 50s. In the 50s, they actually did it because they thought it could get more widely seen by an American audience that wouldn't see a film with subtitles, so they thought it was a good idea. But I don't think that idea has aged as well as they thought it would. I was lucky enough to see the Japanese version, thankfully. Internationally, apparently you can get a copy of it dubbed, but without Raymond Burr, but in America you just can't. Raymond Burr was put in there to get people who were nostalgic for Godzilla King of the Monsters to come out, and it's not a terrible idea, but just having him in there, I kind of understand it, but it is a terrible idea when you think about the fact that they recut it and simply put him in there just watching things that are happening on TV, which sounds like really stupid. And you already have that with the Prime Minister when he's watching what's going on, so effectively you have two subplots where, or almost three at certain points, where people are watching what Godzilla is doing on TV. So I can't imagine that was very audience pleasing. Unless you're into watching people watch TV, then I guess it would have been really amazing. That one got critically panned, whereas this film did a little better with critics. It kind of brought back the Godzilla franchise, and it brought in what many call the Heisei period of Godzilla, or the Versus franchise of this continuity that would go on until the Millennium franchise came in. This film at least tries to do something different, but it just doesn't feel like it really wants to let go of the Godzilla formula. A lot of times when you have a franchise and it wants to do something different, it can't entirely let go. It can't entirely reinvent itself. They're kind of adventurous, but they're not as adventurous. You know, they'll go into the deep end of the pool, but they'll hold on to the side of the pool the whole time, and they're not really going to go into the deep end. And I feel like that's the thing with this film. You know, they couldn't get Ishiro Honda. He turned it down. He was working with Akira Kurosawa, and he didn't really want to do it. And this is the film that kind of happened, but I just wish they had not focused on a human element that didn't really have that much to do with the other events of the film. And I think that really hurts a monster movie. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I think that's kind of this Godzilla movie, but I still thought it was a good Godzilla film, but it wasn't a Godzilla film that is one of my personal favorites or I'd really watch again, unless you could cut out those people. So if you have seen The Return of Godzilla and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. So tomorrow I will have the film Godzilla 2000, and that will be the last of the series of Godzilla reviews I'm doing before the new Godzilla film comes out. Godzilla 2000 will hopefully be tomorrow, and I hope to see you then, and thank you for watching.